Go. All right, I am going to call the Moab City Council meeting to order on April 12th, 2022 at 6:02 p.m. Welcome, everybody. Our first in-person meeting in a while. I know you guys were meeting in person before, but we're back at it. It's good to see everybody here. So we're going to start out with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Doug to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. We've got some citizens to be heard. Sarah, did you fill out the form?
Yeah, I thought it said drop in the bathroom and you're done speaking. It does. I tried.
So if you want to speak tonight, please fill out a form and put it in the collection basket that's going around.
That's okay. That's because we're going to have to. Now we're before. Okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We're all trying to keep us.
Try to get used to everything again. Thank you. All right. We're going to start with Helene. Helena. Thank you for correcting me.
I'm Helene Rohr. Thank you for the opportunity to let me speak tonight. Dear City Council, last week during a think tank titled Moab Tomorrow, data was presented that once again pointed to housing and community as the two big topics Moabites are most worried and concerned about for Moab's future. The symbiotic effect of the two is clear and important to note for the vision of Moab. Housing conditions influence the mental and physical well-being of residents, and healthy residents make for a healthy community. Also just last week, Mayor, you were quoted in an article published by KUTV with saying, "We need to find homes for the people that work and live here, bottom line." So I feel the need to express what is actually happening on the ground right now. Without any complaints from the neighbors whatsoever, I received code violations about properties not being code compliant. Both properties offer long-term housing for active employees. One of the properties has been in its current configuration for the last 8, the other for the last at least 22 years. As it stands right now, the possible scenarios resolving the violations under current code have already resulted in a lowered quality of life for one of the tenants because they lost their kitchen that was in use for the last 8 years, and would also require to take at least one unit off the market, consequentially triggering an increase in rent in the adjacent units, taking them out of the affordability spectrum. Both scenarios seem incredibly counterproductive in keeping our crisis at bay and are going completely against what you are saying you want to do for the community: find homes. I'm not the only landlord I know of who has to deal with this at this time, but I invite you to look at my scenario as a time-sensitive case study, hopefully helping in realizing that there are still a few very restricting sections in the city code. Even if there's no immediate way for you to amend the code again, if you truly stand for what you all say you do, then please, in the meantime, start looking at our long-term housing units like the city did at the ventilators at the beginning of the pandemic. We clearly do not have enough of them. Please ask yourself whether now is really the best time to shut them down because they potentially have a missing tag. Thank you for listening and your consideration.
Thank you so much. Sarah.
I have 2 topics. I'm going to go away from recycling a little, but so I'm going to do 1 minute for each topic, if I can. Except that I set it for 12 hours. Okay, thanks. The city passed a resolution, number 45, 2019, adopting the Sustainability Action Plan. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the gist of it was, whereas the evidence is overwhelming that despite the fact that Moab has an aspirational plan, preparation for climate-related impacts is inadequate. So a few of the things they wanted to do: halt the loss of wildlife populations and include underrepresented populations' voices in sustainability planning. So I want to talk about wildlife first because 4 years ago, just about now, Deb Pappas from Second Chance Wildlife Rehab and I met with Ronnie, Mayor, the last administration, Dave Everett, and I think a couple other people. And we explained that there's a better method than trapping and killing, especially now during baby season when a lot of babies are left to starve in their nest. And especially with all the attractive nuisances of empty trailers that attract them. There's ways to get them to leave on their own. So we encouraged, instead of trapping and killing, assessing and advising. And that's proven to work in many communities. Was that a minute?
You're at 30 seconds.
30 seconds left total? Yes. Out of 2? Ah, okay. And then recycling, there's no mention of recycling in this plan. To me, that's one of the building blocks of sustainability. I've installed 8 recycle bins at Lions Park, and I actually have to leave here as soon as I'm done to go maintain them tonight. I do it every evening. And I run into people all over. This is the first recycling we've seen in all our travels. We love it. People are dying to recycle. Well, we are dying because we're not recycling. Our wasting of 560 billion beverage containers a year is causing a lot of toxic pollution into the air. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll send you a picture from Lions Park.
That'd be great. Thank you. Shar.
I'm Charlotte Mates, and I am a resident of Moab for 26 years, and I am happy to be here tonight. And to reiterate, Sarah's already gone, but she told me right off the bat I forgot to put recycle in the letter to the editor. So recycle, recycle, recycle. Okay, my citizen to be heard tonight is that I just wanted to commend the Moab City for the fantastic think tank that happened last week. I don't think in all the time I've been in Moab that I have ever felt so well heard. So I just want to thank you, and thank you, and thank you. And let's get the word out to every citizen the best way we can, whatever that takes, talking about it, reiterating, publishing, whatever it takes. Thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Anybody else? Last chance. Okay. We are going to move on to presentations. Our first presentation is from the Moab Free Clinic. We've got Doug, Kate, and Danette here.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. I am Kate Jagla, the Development Director from the Moab Free Health Clinic. To give a little bit of background, the Moab Free Health Clinic is a nonprofit organization established in February of 2008 to ensure that all members of the Moab community are able to access healthcare regardless of race, religion, age, gender, healthcare coverage, or financial need. We serve those uninsured with household income within 200% of the federal poverty level, as well as those underinsured with medical insurance deductible greater than 5% of gross household income. So for example, if you're making $20,000, the cutoff would be a $1,000 deductible. We also serve those in need of medical care access if they can't get it due to travel, cost, or time concerns. We offer a wide array of services, starting from general primary care, so wellness checks, physicals, low-cost lab draws, mental health services for just general clinical therapy, counseling, psychiatry. We also have implemented a mental telehealth program with 13 bilingual and Spanish counselors. Women's health is also an important service we offer, including mammograms, which we're also partner with the hospital in order to get these mammograms to underserved women. Access to birth control, family planning, preventive care. We also have vision clinics where you can get a full eye exam and a free pair of glasses. We partner with Grand County School District as well as the Moab Rotary Club and the Hope Alliance of Park City, Utah. Some other services we have include prescription financial assistance, confidential HIV/STI testing, dermatology, and our newest addition is dental care, which we started last year. In 2021, we provided over 1,000 patients with services, and that's over 10% of Grand County's population. And that is in 2,500 visits approximately, and we saved patients over $1 million last year. And the most exciting news I'm here to share with you is we recently purchased the former USU Moab campus as of March 31st, and we are converting it into the Moab Community Resource Center. This expansion was for us, for one thing, because our services are getting so large. We want to add more specialty services to provide more health care to those underserved. But we also recognize health care is not, it doesn't stop at just a patient appointment. It goes further. It also addresses education, it addresses housing, it addresses access to food, all the social determinants of health. So that's what we really want to focus on in this campus, is providing a space for health, social service, and aid organizations to have a space at this campus. So it can be a one-stop shop for our patients and the community members. We recognize collaboration is essential. I mean, we have partnerships with the hospital, we have partnerships with the Southeast Utah Health Department, we have partnerships with nonprofits. We just want to bring this into one location so people can get the help they need. Thank you so much for having me today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Any questions? Well, we've got these folks here. Tawny.
Can you just send us that slide deck?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe they can have a room for us to have healthcare special service district meetings there.
Yes, we will have room for. We've already thought about space for educational community.
Mayor, I just had a question.
Roddy?
So are you guys finding that, things are move-in ready for you, or are you planning to do some kind of capital campaign? Are you going to have to do some reconstruction?
We purchased this property with a zero-interest short-term loan, because I think we all know property goes really fast in Moab, and if you don't jump on it, it's gone the next day. So that's what we did, and now we're working on a capital campaign, going to private foundations and the like, and we're working towards that in terms of renovation as well as eventual purchase. Well, we purchase the property, but pay back of that short-term loan.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Great. I think you're going to be working with the city on a CIB loan grant situation too, so more to come on that to help support the remodel.
Yes, we really appreciate the city.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you on Thursday.
Thanks.
All right, up next, we have the Grantwell RAP Tax Research Findings and Recommendations. We've got Lori and Alyssa online to tell us about what their findings are and what their recommendations are for our RAP tax. So take it away, ladies.
Awesome, thank you. So as Laurie's gonna pull up our slides, but we've been working with Ben on this project for Moab. We're two grad students at BYU who got this opportunity by participating with Grantwell, which is a student-run, faculty-advised consulting program offered through BYU's business school. And so we are here to share with you what we have found and what our recommendations are for Moab's new RAP tax program. And Laurie and I have split this project up into 2 phases. My team worked on phase 1, committee structure and selection, last semester in the fall, and Laurie's team worked on phase 2, application scoring and evaluation, this semester. And so we'll take turns talking about our phases, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. We're also sharing with Ben a Google folder of our reports and all of our deliverables for this project. So for phase 1, committee structure and selection, I'll be covering the function of a committee, the structure of a committee, and committee meetings. And I should start out by saying that you've asked us for this project to help you figure out how a RAP tax committee should be structured, as well as what to include on a RAP tax grant application form, how to review those applications, and then ultimately best practices for recommending to the City Council which projects should be funded. So I'll be covering function, structure, and meetings for the committee, and all of my recommendations are based on research we did of other RAP tax committees and conversations we had with committees, some of which include Spanish Fork, Santaquin, Ephraim, and West Valley City. So there are 3 main functions of a committee. They are to advise, review grant applications, and oversee usage of grants. In our report, we go into more detail about how we recommend you select committee members, but what's important is that voices are present that can reflect the overall interests of the community, as well as voices that can speak to the feasibility of projects. And so the committee members with their unique backgrounds will advise the City Council on which projects should be funded. And as proposals come in, as applications come in, it's the responsibility of committee members to take the time to review those applications, score those applications, and then ultimately vote on which ones should be recommended to the City Council for funding. Another important function is overseeing the usage of grants, because we want to ensure that these funds are being used appropriately and as agreed upon between the grantees and the city. So when we talk about the committee of the structure, based on our research, these 4 components are consistent throughout. Typically, a committee consists of 7 to 9 individuals. Any fewer individuals will result in too heavy of a workload on committee members. Any more, you risk committee members feeling like their position is superfluous or unessential. We also recommend that you have 1 City Council member on this committee, and this person will just be an added resource to the committee that can communicate the vision of elected officials on a broader citywide scale, and they can also speak to the feasibility of projects. Committees consist of both voting and non-voting members. It's consistent throughout that the committee chair and the City Council member on this committee are non-voting members, as their role is mostly to oversee the review of grant applications, speak to the vision of the city, and to also speak to the feasibility of project proposals. And then lastly, we encourage Moab to tailor its committee structure to the needs and available volunteer resources that it has. No 2 RAP tax committees that we researched were the same, and we imagine, Moab is a unique city and will have unique needs and resources available to them. In the next 2 slides, we show what these committee structures can look like. This first one is pretty simple. We have our non-voting committee chair and non-voting City Council member, and then about 5 to 7 voting committee members. In the next slide, you'll see a structure with co-chairs, and some committees do have co-chairs, and this is mostly to distribute the workload of the committee chair if that is desired or necessary. So when we talk about committee meetings, we recommend the following: to hold an orientation meeting. This will just have a positive impact on the success and effectiveness of your committee as you get to know each other, train together, and set expectations clearly. We recommend an annual committee meeting. Holding only 1 formal committee meeting can emphasize the advisory nature of the committee members, because the ultimate authority lies with the City Council, and you will ultimately be deciding who funds these projects. Holding only one meeting can also reduce the burden placed on committee members and their volunteer time. Some committee members hold mid-year meetings to communicate updates on the completion of projects, as well as maybe if the city council decides to fund a project that wasn't recommended. These kinds of things are communicated in mid-year meetings, but we believe they can also be effectively communicated via email. And then we also recommend that you make these meetings available to the public, just as an added measure to communicate that you are you're respecting the community's overall interests and doing your best to reflect those interests. And so that's it on committee structure and selection.
Okay, so now on to phase 2 that I worked with my team on over this past winter semester. So the main components of our project were developing evaluation criteria, creating an updated application form, and then creating a scoring tool that the RAP Tax Committee will be able to use as they evaluate the applications. So our first step was to create evaluation criteria that would form the basis for the scoring tool and for the information that is collected on the application. And so this is, above and beyond just basic eligibility requirements, but we tried to develop criteria that would evaluate both quantitative and qualitative aspects of these projects so that the committee can get an idea of what benefits these projects are going to bring. So these, the categories that we developed were, does the proposal fill a need gap within Moab's community? Is it likely to satisfy residents? Do they have a clear plan for fiscal accountability? And does the proposal have the potential to strengthen Moab's sense of community identity? So this is the application form. So this is the screenshot is just of the first page where it just captures basic organizational and eligibility information. But then the remainder of the application will have fields open for where the proposals or the applicants can provide their descriptions of the project summaries, questions related to each of those previous evaluation criteria so that it captures all of that information that the committee will need to score them on each 4 categories. We also have a list of other possible attachments that the committee can request from applicants. And you can adjust which ones you would like to request from your applicants based on what you think is appropriate for your needs. So once all of the applications have been received, then committee members, the voting committee members will receive these scoring worksheets as well as a scoring rubric with more details about those evaluation criteria. So they'll be able to look at each criteria or look at each application individually and score them in those 4 criteria on a scale of 1 to 5. And then, so our team has developed an Excel spreadsheet that works as a scoring tool, and we've tried to make this really user-friendly. And one of my teammates has also made some instructional videos that will walk the committee members through each of the steps of using our scoring tool. So here, you'll be able to take the averaged scores of all of the committee members' evaluations, so by project and then by each category on a scale of 1 to 5, and then it will create a weighted score. So based on different weights, the committee can choose to, for example, if you want to weight filling needs higher or fiscal accountability or community identity higher, those can be adjusted according to your priorities. And then on this page, you'll be able to see, and again, an overview of the basic information of each proposal. You'll see its final weighted score, its rank, the amount that was requested, and then this final column will be where the committee can go in and manually select yes or no of whether they want to recommend it for funding. Because although the scores are a good indicator, we are aware that they're probably factors and other kind of intangible, things that are going to affect whether a project is going to really be good for the city or not. So we wanted to leave some space to not just automatically pick proposals for funding, but to give the committee that last say before they present their recommendations to you. And then finally, there will just be a dashboard page where they can see how much money they've already allocated and how much is remaining within the budget. And then finally, we have a template for how they can fill out just a summary of their proposed projects that they would like to fund. a basic breakdown of the budget and their scores that they can then submit to the city council for your final approval. So, and then we, as Lizzie mentioned, we will be submitting a big folder of deliverables to Ben with all of the materials that the committee will need to carry out this process. And so now we'd love to just open it up for questions if you have any, and both Lizzie and I have really enjoyed working on this project. So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. Questions from council? Or Lori or Lizzie?
I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you for your work on this. It makes us not have to reinvent the wheel.
Yes, love that.
Ronnie?
Yeah, thanks again. I was curious, in looking at Spanish Fork and Ephraim and Santaquin and West Valley City, obviously they're all going to have different budget sizes. But do you remember offhand kind of how long those communities had a RAP tax in place and kind of what the range of pool of funds that they had that they were playing with was? Just curious. It's fine if you don't remember, but.
I don't remember offhand, but I want to say Spanish Forks has been around for a while, and we have added links to all of their RAP tax committee web pages in our report, so you can go and see how long they've been around in their budgets as well.
Okay, great, thanks. That'll be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I would also just like to add, as far as, in relation to other cities, when our team was talking to some other cities, we were excited about this project because it seemed that this is a little bit more of a developed process than some of these other cities who have had RAP tax programs for even longer. But this, I think, will kind of put Moab a step ahead as far as having this be really organized and transparent.
Oh, thanks. That's interesting.
Anybody else? Questions for Lori or Lizzie? Ben, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so we will take their recommendations and have essentially a formal process outlined in the next council meeting. And just as a reminder, we are on track to collect about $410,000 in RAP tax next year. So with a 50% allocation, that would be about $205,000 internally and $205,000 externally.
That's great. Anything else? All right, more to come on the RAP tax. Thank you, ladies, for taking the time, all the work that you did. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All righty, next we have the consent agenda. We've got 5 items on this agenda. First, we start with the special event permit for the Moab Arts Festival with Teresa's here, and I'm glad to have this back after 2 years, excited. Carly's never been to one, Ben's never been to one, so they're gonna love it. We also have an award for a new 2022 Vector Mudslinger Model MS 800, which is a vacuum trailer, and Levi's here if the council has any questions for him on that. We also have a proposed resolution 10/2022, a resolution declaring certain property owned by the city as surplus, and that includes 4 police vehicles and 1 truck that was used by the engineer, and a letter of support for a USDA grant for the Housing Authority of Southeast Utah for the self-help program, approval of 3 sets of minutes, the 18th, the 19th, and the 22nd. 18th and 19th were our special meetings for a strategic plan. And the 22nd meetings were regular council meeting. And then approval of the bills against the city of Moab in the amount of $1,107,410.74. You did it a lot better than I did it.
I had more practice.
Does anybody want to take, is everybody good with this consent agenda? All right, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I will move to approve the consent agenda, but Levi, I want a demonstration of the Vector Mudslinger 8000.
All right, motion made by Tawny to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kalen. Any discussion from you, Tawny?
No.
Kalen?
I thought it was a Jeep.
Oh, what, the mudslinger? Hey, maybe you can take it out with Jeep Safari. Luke? Ronnie?
I just want to thank the staff. I had a bunch of questions, and thanks for answering those. I learned a lot about so many things. And Tony, I have shotgun on the mudslinger.
All righty. Jason, any
No.
discussion? All right. I'll call for the vote. All in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. All right, on to new business. Kelly is here to talk about community contributions for 2022. We had 16 grants awarded, am I correct?
Yes.
15 grants awarded of $55,000.
Yes.
So, Kelly, tell us what's happening.
So we had a committee of 3 staff members that reviewed all of the applications that were submitted, and the recommended funding is listed on here compared to the requested funding, and all of the funds were requested to be, or recommended to be spent, and it was done based on different criteria for what filling the needs gap and what the committee saw would benefit the community most. We did recommend to fund almost all of the projects that were submitted. So ultimately, the decision will be up to the council whether or not to approve the recommended funding, and we can make any changes that you feel necessary.
Thank you. Questions or suggestions for Kelly? Connie?
Sea Haven has normally had a line item for between $7,500 and $10,000. Is this grant in addition to that?
I actually had the same question because the application that came through was for 10,000 on the listing, and so I actually wasn't sure on that either. If this is in addition to, I mean, we still have that line item for $10,000, and this is included in the 2,000. So the way I read it is that it is in addition to that supplementary. So it's supplementary to the $10,000 contribution.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that we shuffle something around if that wasn't in addition. I'd like to see a little more go to the Multicultural Center.
Okay.
Too.
Ronnie?
Can we request, in the past, when we've had these discussions, we check in with the nonprofit, so can we just check in with Sea Haven, just in case there's a misunderstanding there, and they, this is part of their application for the, that just helps us when we have to weigh, because sometimes if somebody already has a line item and we have to make tight choices, that can impact what we do. And then nothing against the process we have now, but I was just going to throw it on the side, just a question to this council, because we have a new council, if maybe in the future members might want to revisit a different system for this, because I think for Kaylin and Tawny and I, when we came on in 2016, individual groups would come and ask the council for funds or for fee waivers, and that's how we handled it. And then at some point we decided, the majority of the council decided, actually let's put aside a fund of a certain amount of money and then have folks apply to that fund. And I'm just wondering, I think staff went to all this trouble, and this is our plan for 2022. But I'm just wondering, moving forward, if it might not be time to revisit that, because I don't know about you guys, but I've had nonprofits come to me in the community and say that they feel like the system has pitted them a bit against each other. And I think it might also be time to revisit where in our budget there are places for services that are being provided that maybe should be line items. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there for future conversation. But I wanted to thank Kelly and the committee for doing this, and I think we should work off these recommendations for this year. But
More to come later this evening.
Thank you, Ronnie. Anybody? Luke?
So I might be able to shed a little bit of clarity in regards to the Sea Haven thing. I've been in contact with executive director of Sea Haven over the past couple of days, and it sounds, I'm not 100% certain on this, but it sounds like the $10,000 was kind of the annual ask. So I don't know that this was a supplementary ask. I think this was kind of an assumption to get the standard annual, like $10,000. And even if it wasn't, like, what I got was, if it was just like the 2,000 out of the 10,000, that it would be a bummer, but they could make it work. So I do have some, I want to kind of echo what Tawny said in terms of wishing that potentially like MVMC and Moab Solutions potentially had a little bit more allocated towards them. Right now, I'd say probably those three organizations, Seek Haven, the Multicultural Center, and Moab Solutions, really are the three organizations in our community right now that are kind of facing the brunt of a lot of the displacements that is happening. A lot of their resources are really being exhausted because of the housing crisis. I actually had a meeting with Seek Haven last week, and they were telling me that at this point, when they try to put people up in an RV park for a month, I think that's costing them $1,400 a month. And so their funds are getting really stretched. It was also alluded to, I think, in kind of their application that VOCA, I'm blanking on it. I'm blanking on
Violence
that.
Against Women Act.
No, that's VAWA.
No, the VOCA, yeah.
Victims of Crime Act.
That's it. Sorry, oh man, I feel bad. That was part of my life for a while. But VOCA has actually diminished their award over the next 2 years by $200,000, and they've actually taken extra steps to limit their ability to be able to amend their budget by shifting funds around across budget categories. So potentially, if there's an unfilled position for a couple of months, that money can't be reallocated to some of those emergency services, which specifically pay for like hotel rooms and housing assistance and all of that stuff. So it was just something to take into consideration that, last week I got made aware that there's going to be more displacements happening. There's a couple of unlicensed campgrounds that are occurring on private properties across the county, and one of them has already received an eviction notice. And so these are the three organizations that are really going to have to step up within our community to try to respond to that. But that's just kind of my thoughts.
Anybody else?
I'd just like to echo
Okay.
what Luke said, as I was kind of looking over that and the displacements that are going on right now. I think these are critical needs, and these are critical situations that need to be looked at as fires, that need to be, help put out right now and stuff. So, I don't know the best way to kind of look at this. I have thoughts on each one of these groups, and I agree with the Multicultural Center, is doing a lot right now, and they really need a lot of support, whereas, some of these aren't fires in the community, so.
Kaylin, and then you, Ronnie.
I was just going to echo the sentiment expressed by, I think, almost everyone
Okay.
in that regard.
Ronnie?
I just had a question for you, Carly and Ben. Is there anything, because I know you made the comment, Ben, about, some discussion later tonight. Is there anything maybe about that discussion that would benefit us in tabling this just till the next meeting that might allow us to get a little bit more information and then figure out if some of this is double funding, but also if there's just a few of these that we can address in other ways? I know it looks like this time that wasn't the case. Sometimes we get lucky, and there are situations where we can do a gift in kind or office space or something that helps, or find a community partner that can also help. But I think you guys have done a great job of identifying, what we do and what we can do. But I would just hate to miss an opportunity that we're going to discuss later that could better inform us if we do need to restructure some amounts. Yeah.
It does seem like some of these awards are going to benefit the same people or the same groups of people a couple of times. So I hate to put it off, but maybe we do just need a little bit more background.
We can do that, to take some more time to talk through it. With the community contributions, if you wanted to give money to one group, more money, you'd have to cut from somewhere else. So that's the limitation with this program.
Yeah.
But of course, we're also, like Ben is saying, we're in budget season. So if we want to take the line item routes for some of these organizations, you can do that, you can do both. So definitely, I don't think there's a time constraint. I haven't heard of one for any of these groups. Do you remember any from the applications?
We just gave them an estimate
Yeah.
of about April, late April.
So maybe depending on how our discussion goes this evening, we can revisit it later in April, on April 26th.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with not putting it off a long time. I just thought if it gives us more information, then we maybe serve everybody, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of folds into the RAP tax too question, right? Grantwell and everything, because a lot of these could be served by that money as well. So we have these new funding sources that you might want to take a look at before making a decision about this program in particular.
Yeah, and I'm also still waiting to hear back on, I put some feelers out to find out what types of assistance the county offers. I know that they just received a lot of funding for economic diversification grants, and kind of what I've read in the papers and what I've heard from some community members. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that might potentially cover. And there's potentially some things on here that I think might be a little bit better suited to receive support from the county rather than the city. So I'm in favor of kind of postponing things.
Great.
I mean, I'm willing to make a motion to table until the April 26th meeting, just so we get a little bit more information. Yeah.
All right, motion made by, go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question on,
Sure.
for staff recommendations on how you'd like us to proceed with this?
Well, let's make the motion and then we can ask that question, all right? Ronnie made a motion to table the community contributions for 2022 until the April 22nd meeting. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Second by Jason. Any discussion, Ronnie?
No, just April 26th, although,
Oh, sorry.
if you want to meet on the weekend, we can.
No, I don't. That might be my birthday, so no, we definitely don't want to do that. All right, Jason, any discussion? Luke? Kaylin, Tawny? How would you like Kelly to proceed?
I think perhaps we could individually give feedback after we review the information and maybe have the chance to both give feedback as well as ask questions.
Okay.
And you could collate that as you do for other issues. How would that
Great.
sound?
Does that sound good, Kelly?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, all in favor of the motion to table until the next meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. All right, Chuck. Approval of a task order to develop a water utility resource management plan. And this is basically approving the consultants that are going to be working with Moab Grant and San Juan County on our water resource management plan, correct?
Excuse me, yes, that is correct. I don't have a presentation. I have available the task order, the agenda summary, plus the presentation we gave last time, but I would report that since we talked about this in detail at the water workshop on 2/22/22, I believe it was, we have spent time taking some comments from some folks, and mainly it was beef up the stakeholder and public engagement. It was the substantial comments, and we've done that. And the other thing is we have also are going to hire a meeting facilitator, a Logan Simpson Design under separate contract to help the public outreach and the stakeholder involvement. I believe Logan Simpson did your strategic planning meeting, and they have a little more experience in the public engagement side. You know, Carly and I were looking at this and we thought that's a good thing, you know, to bring their expertise into that. That's a separate, that's under Carly's signing authority. I'll send it out tomorrow, which kind of was late breaking news, but we've taken some money out of this task order so there wouldn't be a repetitive process during the stakeholder and public, though Hanson Allen Luce will certainly be involved. But anyway, I think this is it's been vetted in my opinion. You know, we've gone out and we've had comments and we've included them. And I think it's a good time, and we'd recommend that we have funding for it, that we move forward, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, council? Ronnie?
So just so there's no misunderstanding, thanks for answering my questions, but if somebody's watching and didn't, get the answers I got. So originally, folks signing the MOU, we're looking at $230,000, and now I think we're adding up to 226. So the sense is that the added consultants for public process will not be more than $4,000. I think you told me you thought it would be $2,500?
No, for clarity.
Yeah.
If we add it back into Hanson, Allen, and Luce, it'll be that. No, the public facilitators are more on the order of $30,000, $30,000 to $40,000. There's a lot of meetings on this topic. You know, we're going to be, and I think that's what I heard from the council when we at the water workshop. You know, that you wanted that amount of engagement. So that's why the costs are the.
Okay, I guess it just, I mean, just to my colleagues, it confuses me because we had discussed in the February meeting that that you guys approved $230,000, but there was the notice in the scope of work that it didn't. There would be an extra charge for public participation, but I thought at that meeting it sounded like, oh no, we'll do public participation, and I got the impression that it would be wrapped in and encapsulated in that 230. So it's probably important to know if we now think the overall bill is 260.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, just, and if I can add it, like,
Yeah.
we were realizing that this is going to have so much intense interest. It's highly, you know, ripe for conflict because we're talking about water, and the stakeholder group is huge. And I think originally Hanson Allen Luce had like a plan of like $6,000 for public engagement, which is just so tiny for a task, for a scope of work of this size. Generally, you're looking for public engagement costs around 30% of your total project costs. That's like a good rule of thumb. We're under that with the current kind of scope from Logan Simpson. It's, you know, under the $50,000, so I can sign for it. But really, I think this will it'll help inspire confidence in the project. It will be an objective third party who can help facilitate these difficult conversations, and in the long run will be probably a time and a cost saver because it just sets it up for success better. Yeah, so it's sort of separating the engineering part and the engagement part and making that engagement much more robust.
Any other questions for Chuck? I'll entertain a motion to approve the task order to develop a water utility resource management plan.
I will move to approve the task order for Hanson Allen and Luce Incorporated to develop the water utility resource management plan and authorize the mayor to sign it.
Motion made by Tani. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Kalen. Discussion, Tani?
No.
Kalen?
Nope.
Luke? Ronnie?
I'm going to vote against this. I do think that public participation is important, but I have tried to ask questions along the way to clarify costs and public involvement, and just a last-minute addition of $30,000 I'm not comfortable with.
Okay. Jason?
No.
All right. Motion made by Tani. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Motion passes 4-1. Ronnie opposed. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
All right. Ben, administration recommended budget for fiscal year 22-23. This is just the beginning. We're going to have a lot more conversations, just so you know. So tonight, we're going to have Ben tell us what's going on with the budget.
Okay,
Maybe.
maybe. I have notes on one, so you present in presenter mode, but now it seems to be switching. Oh well, this will work. So like the mayor mentioned, this is really the first round of budgeting. So the first thing that I wanted to do is talk about what the administrative recommended budget is. Just to lay the groundwork for what we're talking about here tonight. So essentially, before the strategic planning session, we started the department head requests budgetary process, and that's where all the department heads essentially put together what they feel they need for the coming fiscal year. And we collate that information and present a balanced budget to the council for the first round of budgeting. I think it's important to note that not all department budgets are funded in the admin budget. There's some shaving that has to be done in order to make everything balance. It's also important to note that the first state mandated budget is not the admin recommended budget. This is actually in addition to what's required by the state, and it eases doing an admin budget eases the budgetary process and makes the changes from tentative to final more seamless, just because it allows a greater period for the council to provide feedback. Because just as a reminder, the budget adoption really is the city council's budget. It's not staff's budget, it's not anyone's budget, but the city council's. So this essentially provides the foundation for a budget for you guys to modify from there. So that said, the next step is to look at a picture of Ronald Reagan. You might wonder what this has to do with the annual budgetary process for the city of Moab. So in 1981, he campaigned on reducing the federal debt. And in one of his first time he addressed the public, he made this analogy of the federal deficit. He said, a stack of $1,000 bills in your hand is only 4 inches high. Oh, and a side note, $1,000 bills were no longer minted after 1969, so why he used $1,000 is kind of interesting. But he said $1,000 bills is 4 inches high, and it would make you a millionaire. So if you have a stack of four inches of $1,000 bills. $1 trillion, which the federal deficit was quickly approaching at that time, is a stack of bills 67 miles high. So he used this very abstract concept to relay what the federal deficit is, and it made it very scary. Right, that's a number that like you can't really fathom 67 miles of $1,000 bills. I point this out because with our city budget, we are proposing a general fund budget of $16 million. This can be very difficult to conceptualize. It's nothing like $1 trillion, but even on the day-to-day operations, it's very difficult for us to conceptualize what that actually means and what the city's able to do with that kind of money. My goal with this budget presentation is to make this budget easy to understand and easy to conceptualize what the action items are, where changes can logically be made by city council instead of trying to digest the budget as a whole. So that was my goal, and we'll see if I was successful in that. So we started with, like I said, we started with the department head request, then we moved into the strategic planning process. For those of you who have reviewed Logan Simpson's work product, I've seen a couple comments on there. They essentially developed a few initiatives and then 24 objectives. And those initiatives were a little bit more vague, so earning the public's trust in local government, creating a long-term plan, and developing community betterment. Those didn't translate directly into, one of them did, but they didn't translate directly into the budget, just because they're a little bit more abstract in that sense. But those objectives very much did. So there were 10 objectives that Logan Simpson identified that didn't require any budgetary component. They're essentially goals for departments. They're policies that we can set that don't have direct budgetary action. There were 14 that did require a budgetary allocation. There's some financial component to the objective. Of those 14, we were able to work into the admin budget all but 5 of them. And the 5 that were unfunded, I listed those here, were noise ordinance regulation, the Moab Municipal Code revision, emergency dispatch issues, addressing deferred maintenance and infrastructure, and facilities HVAC upgrades. Each of those kind of has a different reason why it was not included in the admin budget. But I mean, essentially, there are things that we can still work on, but may not come to fruition in the current budget cycle. And by the way, I have no problem being interrupted if there's things that come up along the way. So since tonight isn't intended to address some of these detailed questions, like line level detailed questions, I wanted to address the attachment in the budget, which is the actual recommended budget. It's, I don't remember how many pages, 30 or 40 pages. of line items. You know, it's an Excel document printed out. I wanted to work through what those mean. That's why I have this screenshot here. So essentially what I did was created a materiality threshold. Carly made fun of me for this, for making a materiality threshold on the budget, but it was basically just saying, how do we define what is a material variance from the prior year's budget? And so what I did, because like if you have a $100 budget and it has a 100% increase, it's not really of grave concern because that makes it a $200 budget. If you have $1 million budget and you have a 100% increase, that's more concerning. And so what I did was I created these materiality thresholds to capture that and to identify like what line items actually need attention, what needs explanation. And I will admit, like the $1 million to $20 million materiality threshold is 10%. That could be ratcheted back pretty easily. If you guys as council would like to see that materiality threshold compressed a little bit to essentially provide for more scrutiny, I'm happy to do that. Happy to provide line item explanations for any budgetary line item that you have questions on. But if you wanted to make those adjustments, we could do that. And then here you can see kind of that middle screenshot. This is the work product from that materiality threshold. So this one was called out specifically, police, professional, and technical, where the prior year budget was $43,000 and the recommended budget is $87,000. So because that recommended budget's $87,000, it falls within this third group where if it exceeds 75%, then it will be called out as needing explanation. So that's what I did here because it was a 200% increase from the prior year. And I included an explanation that it includes lead mitigation, translation services, and a number of other things. And then there was a line item right below that, police other, and this is where there was no prior year budget, and that triggered an explanation because there was no precedent. So that's kind of an explanation of how that document works. Just wanted you guys to be aware of how that works so that when you're reviewing the budget, you know what triggered questions or what triggered responses. So the next thing that I wanted to go over is our fund accounting. We have a couple new council members and a mayor, and fund accounting is unique to government, and so there's a number of reasons that we create funds within fund accounting. Some of them are legislatively required. Some are required by, like bond issuers require a specific debt service fund, for example. But starting with the general fund, this is where all of the money is captured that is unrestricted. So this is essentially the starting point for the majority of the funds that come into our entity. Then you have the debt service fund. This is pretty self-explanatory. The bulk of our debt obligations are paid out of our debt service fund, and they're contributed to from other funds as well. We have capital projects fund, and this is where we capture the general government capital projects. And the exception to these two are enterprise funds. So enterprise funds are the water, sewer, stormwater. They pay their own debt service, and they pay for their own capital projects as well. Class C road funds, recreation fund, and housing fund, and community development fund are all special revenue funds that have dedicated revenue sources that have to be spent a certain way. So I touched on the enterprise funds already. I will note that the parking and transit fund is a new fund as of last year, and it is created as an enterprise fund, meaning at some point in the future there may be, say, fares that are contributed, and so it could be a fully funded program if we collected, parking fees or transit fees. That's not to say that it is that way for now. The general fund will contribute to that fund until it's, some indefinite point in the future. We also have an internal service fund, which serves as the health insurance program. All of that to say, there are, for every single one of these funds, there are income statements and there are there's financial statements for each of those income statements and balance sheets. And these funds can really be understood as business units of the city. They're kind of independently operating. And as far as the flow of funds is concerned, the only thing that's important to know is that money can go out of the general fund but we're very limited in pushing money back into the general fund out of those other funds. There's very specific state requirements. Like, for example, we can't increase our water rates so that we can, provide more money to the general fund. So it's one directional, generally speaking. You guys are most of you are aware of the overhead allocation. So the water does pay some money into the general fund, but it's within a reasonable amount that's audited by our financial auditors. Okay, so now we get into revenue sources. Where does our money come from? The one number that I wanted to point out that I believe comes up in another slide is our total external revenue. So cash that's coming into the city for fiscal year 23 is budgeted at $26 million. When the general fund contributes to another fund, that creates a revenue for another fund. So when I say external money, that doesn't include those internal transfers. And so we have $26 million of essentially new cash, external cash coming in, whether that's from various number of things. The top four, local option sales tax, resort community tax, transient room tax, and energy and franchise tax, those are all general fund unrestricted dollars. That amounts to pretty much exactly half of the external money that comes into our entity. Everything else comes from the 10 or 15 other categories that I have listed here. The transportation tax and Class C road funds, those are restricted to Class C, the Class C road fund. RAP tax, you guys know what that is and why it's restricted. And then there's all the other sources of revenue, which may or may not be restricted depending on what it is. So Kaylin asked the question earlier today as to whether or not our planning department whether or not the cost of administering a permit is covered with our fees. That's one of those unrestricted fees that goes to cover the cost of our planning and building department. I don't have an answer for you yet, but we are working on it.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is that external revenue that I was talking about, where I said that half of it was from the general fund, half of it was the general fund sales tax revenue. There's other unrestricted money in the general fund, which is about $15 million. And so our capital projects fund has a lot of external money coming in this year. That's primarily related to the hotspot program. And then, the water and sewer are also big recipients of external money because they're utility funds. You pay your water bill and it goes into the water fund. Okay, so now we get into kind of really the bulk of the decision-making process. We have proposed, the administrative budget proposes 6 new full-time positions and 1 new part-time position. And I will say, I reviewed this presentation with my wife last night. She's kind of like my business partner. And she said that putting the dollar amount up there is kind of a big, scary number for these 7 proposed positions. And she really made me question whether or not we should include that in this presentation. The reason that I decided that it was a good idea to include this, even though it's kind of a big, scary number, is because this is a decision point for the council. It's much easier to create a position than it is to eliminate a position. So when we propose adding new positions to city staff, that should be something that's heavily scrutinized by the city council, because that is going to be an ongoing cost until, either that position is riffed or something changes in our structure, organizational structure. So I will talk briefly about each of those, but this is definitely important for ongoing conversations because this is, like I said, a big financial commitment. So we have a building inspector who would be kind of do similar work that Barry is doing. And the rationale behind that is that we have a lot of big projects coming online and essentially that there's no backup for that position as well. So it's kind of a twofold reason for that justification. A code enforcement officer, a police department domestic violence specialist. This is something that's been talked about recently. a WRF worker, a transit coordinator / grant writer. So I will mention briefly on this transit coordinator, this is a 50% position between the transit program because the hotspot program allows for a part-time 20-hour-a-week position in that capacity. And there's also been identified a need for a grant writer for the city that would be under engineering. An additional person in vehicle maintenance, this was something that was brought up during our strategic planning session. And then a seasonal parks worker. Those are the positions that have been proposed that constitute this $700,000. And that ultimately results in a 6% increase in total employment costs. So we also have merit increases, which have a ceiling. I say ceiling because the 3% is the maximum under city policy that's able to be awarded. And so that would be a ceiling of $210,000. And then we have a previously approved cost of living adjustment for $400,000. And the employment is really the bulk of what the city does. If you were to, compile all costs and categorize them, employment costs are number one. Where cities are simply a very heavy labor, we provide a service. And I will touch on that a little bit in a coming slide.
Could I ask some questions about that slide?
Absolutely.
So the grant writer, will they be writing grants for basically anything within the city?
Yeah, the idea is that the majority of them would be for capital projects, and that's why it would fall under the engineering department.
Okay. When you first said that, I thought it might be more appropriate if we had it under, say, a community development department. But knowing where our strengths are, that makes sense.
Yeah.
At least for this year.
Mm-hmm. And we do have to apply for, just to clarify, grants for the transit program too, if you recall those FTA grants. So we would need that skill set anyway.
Yep. And then you mentioned that the noise ordinance regulation was an unfunded objective, but is there any possibility that the additional code enforcement staff person could have skills to assist in that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Carly, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, part of the enforcement isn't just pulling people over and measuring. It's about education. It's about educating businesses. So code enforcement could be a big part in that. Actually, the most cost-effective part in enforcement is education. So you can see that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question or follow-up question on the grant writer. I'm not sure how some of these kind of grants work here, but I know in my experience that a lot of the grants that I've written for allow for certain positions to be funded through indirect funds and everything like that. I'm not sure if that's an allowable expense within the grants that this person would be applying for, because that could potentially become a partially self-funded thing if they apply for those types of grants.
So the cost of the grant writer is actually eligible for that grant expense?
Yeah, as long as they're basically overseeing kind of the implementation of the grant, and particularly across several different grants, I think a lot of that work would be eligible to be reimbursed through some sort of indirect cost rate.
Yeah,
that's true.
And go ahead.
No, I was also going to mention with the building inspector too, not the benefit load of that position, but the salary load. We charge, our fee schedule charges at Barry's hourly rate. So they kind of pay for themselves too because it gets pushed onto the developers for the inspection fees. So just to keep that in mind.
Would the domestic violence specialist be a sworn officer, or would that be kind of a civilian position?
The recommendation was for a domestic violence specialist at the investigator level and a post-sworn officer, so someone reviewing reports and being kind of actively on call at all times when there are questions about domestic violence.
Okay.
So I created this chart to visualize where the new positions are proposed. This I kind of did for myself, but after I was looking at it, I rolled it into the presentation because I felt like it really represented, it represented what a famous quote from Joe Biden. So he said, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value." I always liked that. It's a good quote. So what I did here was I essentially plotted all salaries and plus benefits by department. And in green, these are the departments that I feel are kind of the core service of the city. And when the average resident thinks of what a city service is, this is really, I meant to highlight streets as well. But this is where what most people view as city services. A lot of the others are support staff and administrative staff. But in yellow are the new positions that are being proposed. So essentially you can see that it's, building up on public safety, a little bit on recreation, utilities, and so each one of those 7 positions is built up in here. And I will, I realize this is a lot to digest, so I can certainly send this slide deck to you as the council following this presentation.
What's the difference between safety and public safety?
Good question. So safety is our, this is a position that was recommended that be created by the Utah Local Governments Trust. And my understanding is maybe it was staffed previously. We now have a full-time person in that capacity. And so safety is merely related to the safety for the organization as a whole. Public safety is law enforcement, code enforcement, animal control, animal shelter, that sort of thing. Okay, so now we get into our fleet policy and fleet replacements and fleet acquisition. So what I'm going to be talking about developments of plans moving into next year. And what I found is that we don't have a necessarily solid guidance on a fleet policy. And so I'm going to recommend that we develop a fleet policy in 2023. This is not something that we're contracting out, just a policy that we develop internally. And some of the things that this will address are like lease versus purchasing, the turnover period, and fleet electrification, which is something that was discussed in strategic planning. So then we get to, again, this is another decision point. So we have fleet addition requests. So these are requests for acquiring new fleet vehicles. And this is a little bit maybe of a less weighty decision because we're acquiring an asset that could be sold at a future date. So this is, belongs on the balance sheet, but it's still important to understand where the flow of funds is going. So assuming that the new building inspector position is filled, we would convert the Highlander for use by the planning department because they're visiting job sites and need that all-wheel drive vehicle. And then as a replacement I put admin fleet vehicles. Really, this is for the entire organization. These are vehicles that city council or staff checks out to use. We found that in the last year since we started kind of post-COVID, that there's really a need for 2 vehicles. I think it was actually requested 3, but I only included 2 in the admin budget. And we're proposing 2 electric sedans in this case. Fully electric the marginal cost increase from a traditional sedan wasn't significant. So we felt like we could jump that gun a little bit even before a policy is adopted. We also proposed a new vehicle for streets, a replacement vehicle, and the next few are crew cab trucks. So streets, facilities, and the water department all requested crew cab trucks for their crews, with the facilities being a replacement vehicle. And streets sweeper, which is, that would be a replacement, and that would be paid for out of the Class C fund. So that's funded from there.
It doesn't seem like there's very many properties within the city of Moab that require four-wheel drive high clearance for access. Is it about image more than vehicle capabilities?
That's a great question. I think job sites can get muddy at times, and that's the rationality being used at least. So,
okay.
Yeah. So this, the next slide here, unless there's anything else on fleet. Any other questions? So the next slide is something that has been kind of a weighty thought process for me. I've really labored over this. The balance of operational versus capital costs. So in the May meeting, the first meeting in May, we'll be discussing the capital projects, capital improvement prioritization. And as you know, the city's unable to keep pace with the needs of our long-term capital replacement costs. I don't think this is a foreign concept for most municipalities. I think we all struggle to keep up on some of the long-term replacement needs. But I did review the city's debt policy that was adopted in 2019, and it said that a significant portion of capital improvements should be funded on a pay-as-you-go basis and striving to increase the percentage of capital improvements year over year. So basically what that debt policy is saying is that we should replace our capital needs on a cash basis and only bond when absolutely needed. And the percentage of the budget that's used for those capital replacements should increase over time. This is kind of an interesting concept, and also maybe difficult to measure as well, because you take this year, for example, we have a very large capital project on the proposed budget of the dispersed parking. It's a $4.5 million project if you include amenities. And this is something that has a external contribution from UDOT. And so as you compare capital expenses year over year, it's kind of difficult to create that, to understand exactly how you measure that percentage improvement year over year. But I think it's important that we start talking about this. So as the first bullet point there is capital improvement prioritization, which will be in May. And we have this comprehensive financial sustainability plan. This is a plan that basically will lay out, so as all of the departments, have their master plans in place, this is essentially like the finance department master plan. This is establishing our capital needs and creating a plan to accomplish those. And so that's going to be a really important thing that we do next year to make sure that we can meet the needs of the community and replace our capital assets when we need to. I put a few bullet points there regarding that capital contributions, year-over-year capital contributions. So the other question is, budgeted versus actual. We have the majority of our capital projects this year are actual carryover projects from prior years. Very few of them are kind of newly minted projects, just because they take multiple years to complete or they're not completed in the time frame expected. And then there's that external contribution factor that I mentioned. Something that you may hear as you attend, like ULCT, you have ULCT coming up. There's this concept of funding depreciation. I wanted to touch on that really just briefly. So we have a depreciation schedule that we maintain for all of our assets that contains the historic cost and the annual depreciation. The idea is that if you quote unquote, fund that depreciation and you're contributing that amount into your capital improvements every year, that you're taking care of your assets. I just want to be perfectly clear that the funding depreciation is funding historic depreciation, and we're still depreciating assets that are like 45 years old, 47 years old. And so it's not capturing the historic cost of that asset. So funding depreciation is entirely insufficient and probably is not a great benchmark to be using when we analyze our capital costs. So I put a bullet point here for private utilities. We have a lot of cities to compare to. We can compare ourselves to a lot of cities and how they're funding their capital needs. I was brainstorming the other night and wondered what if there's any comparable private sector businesses that have these major assets that they have to replace on a regular basis, the only thing that I came to was private utilities. So electric companies, gas companies, the bulk of the service they provide is very similar to a city in that we're not actually providing a service, we're maintaining these assets, right? And so what I did was I looked up their gross profit margin for Pacificor and Dominion, these branches of their business. This is kind of just a fun side note. But their gross profit margin is, for Pacificor is 17% and Dominion is 23%. And so basically this is all the money they have available to fund your debt principal, your capital improvements and acquisitions, and any like equity distributions that they make as an organization. And so it may be interesting over time to use these private sector businesses to say, you know, they're making it work within, you know, they have to make it work because they're a private sector business. They don't have the ability to tax. And maybe that could be a target for the city, is to use like an average of private utilities. It'd be interesting. So I do know of the $16 million in our general fund this year, about 6% of that is being contributed to either debt service principal or capital improvements. So, you know, kind of a long ways to go, a big spread there in that window, if that's even a valid benchmark at all. It's more just kind of a fun exercise. Community investment in the police department. This is something really exciting that I wanted to touch on, and it's the only department that I'm specifically calling out because of the increased level of investment that's being proposed in the admin budget. This budget proposes really an unprecedented commitment to the police department. In turn, we anticipate that this will result in an unprecedented level of service as well. I wanted to touch on a few of those things. So we have the domestic violence specialist that we already talked about. This was a recommendation that was made to the city. Rihanna had sent the email to council regarding language translation services. This is something that we're proposing to fund. We have a temporary housing allowance for the police department included. We have the requested training budget was doubled. So we doubled what was requested by the department head. We have an allocation for nuisance abatements. So this is something that we've never specifically budgeted for, but, and same with the next one, abandoned vehicle towing. So this is a specific line item that would allow us to take quicker action when there's abandoned vehicles on city streets. And we also proposed a significant investment in software and records management. So those are all things that really are kind of unprecedented with the city's budget and is reflected in the admin proposed budget. The next item that I wanted to touch on was dark sky compliance. So this is our final budget year for city compliance. We essentially, the fiscal year 2024 will get part of the year to be compliant with city facilities, but I think that the bulk of what we're doing should be captured in this next fiscal year. So we allowed for $100,000 for those streetlights conversions, which is a rollover from the current year just because that project won't be completed by July 1st. And we also have $50,000 allocated for dark sky compliance. This is probably not the best place to discuss that Rocky Mountain Power contract, but I will say that we've made some progress with looking at what other communities have done that weren't satisfied with their solution. So there's essentially more to come on that in the near future. Okay, we're on to community contributions. So this was one slide that I was actually quite nervous to discuss because we removed it from the admin budget. What we found as we looked at the applications that came in this year is there are essentially two major groups of applicants. There are like the arts and things that would be eligible under the RAP tax, under a RAP tax contribution, and then there's social services. And I forget who mentioned it, maybe Tawny mentioned that you're essentially pitting these, in a competitive grant application, these two groups of funding applications together when that didn't feel like they should be competitive with each other. And so what we're proposing is that the RAP tax community contribution, or the RAP tax takes some of those community contribution applications, we redirect them to that program. And then the social services component, the groups that have been mentioned this evening already, have actually a budgetary line item appropriation in lieu of any sort of competitive application process. That does a few things. So these are services that are sometimes in larger metro areas are filled by government entities or funded by government entities, but where we don't have the capacity to do that. Essentially, they're providing a service not only to the community, but really to the city in a lot of cases. And so we feel like by committing a certain dollar amount to each of those entities, it's not competitive, and so they can essentially rely on that without having to complete a competitive application process. So that's how we're proposing moving forward with community contributions. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
So can I ask you, when you did your, when we talked before, you said there was 410,000, 205 internal, 205 external. So is that like 205 would be for like these line item things or nonprofits or something, or what's the difference?
Yeah, so $205,000 would have to be, so, and that's if you as a city council would like to maintain that 50-50 allocation of internal use versus external use. That $205,000 is an unprecedented amount with, if you compare it to community contributions. So if desired, you could scale that number back and retain more for internal purposes. That's, it's purely your discretion as we propose that process. But $205,000 would not be eligible for the social services. It would have to go towards arts programming, recreation programming, whatever, along those lines. Because the state really dictates how RAP money is spent. Yeah.
So my thought on the RAP was it might be a little premature for us to get into a discussion about how appropriate we think this would or wouldn't be, because obviously the community did a lot of organizing to promote that tax and to get it passed. And I know I'm so crazy busy these days, I can't remember offhand, our whole focus when we were going out to voters. I mean, I can in general, but not specifics. So I just wouldn't want to get ahead of myself and say this is appropriate without looking back and reviewing or talking to some of the people, some of which are here tonight, but who worked the hardest on that, just to make sure we're now not taking it in a direction that we said we weren't going to go. I mean, I think my memory is that. This would be for recreation, arts, and parks, but that there would be a community-based committee, which we talked about some with Grantwell tonight, but that would help make the determination of how it was spent. So I just feel like it would be stepping on the toes of that committee to decide at first hand here what should happen without letting it go through the process, but good to know that this is an option. Yeah.
I think it is important to give that committee direction on the allocation percentage, just so that they know kind of upfront what they should expect to fund.
So I agree in part with what Ronnie said, but I am also aware that city staff put in a lot of time on the RAP tax, and I personally cultivated political endorsements for it. So I feel like the city has a lot of ownership too. I am aware that there's also perhaps a tension between funding operations with RAP tax and funding capital improvements. And I don't have an opinion about that at this time. I am aware that we have some unfunded objectives from the strategic plan, which if we used it to offset operations, at least in the next budget year, that would potentially free up some money for those other objectives. Mm-hmm. And look in a previous chart that you showed, Parks and Rec is like way over on the right end for what gets funded. And it seems like there's some other areas that the community is really crying out for attention. So just wanted to throw that out there.
If we did this, and just removed it from the budget and replaced what we could with the RAP tax, where would that social services money come from?
Yeah, so that would be a new line item in the budget. Essentially, what revenue source, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Like it would just be worked into the general operating budget.
Okay.
So, it may require that we cut from other places to prioritize that.
Although you're cutting out community contributions, so maybe it's just that is dedicated to those social services. It kind of frees up, because you have this RAP tax money suddenly that you can spend. So, community contributions have been cut more and more each year, and it's just like $50,000 for all of these organizations, and suddenly you have $205,000 plus that 50 to spend. So it sort of makes the pie much bigger if we break it up like that.
Okay.
Who qualifies a social what is social services and how they become a designated line item? Because it seems like you'd have to have some sort of process so that someone can't just come in each year and say, I'm a new thing providing this. Would we have to come up with that to figure it out? Because maybe there's some things in here that we wouldn't be able to fund,
Yeah, without making any, commitments, I think it would be similar to what we're doing currently with the $10,000 to Seacaven, where it's actually specifically dedicated to an organization.
And you would have to identify those 4 or 5 or whatever it is.
You'd have to identify those 4 or 5, but then how do you, but then someone comes the next year and says, hey, I think I want to be a part of this. What it seems like, you could potentially have people coming each year and say, I'm a new thing that wants to become a line item, stuff. And how do you vet those or.
You'd have to develop those criteria similar to what we do for community contributions, right? And we just make it more social service oriented. And there are limitations on who you can give money. You can't just give free money to people all the time. You have to pass a Doug Short, a legal analysis to make sure it's actually appropriate. Where something, again, without making commitments, these clear, Seacaven is so clearly providing a benefit to the community, and some of the others where they're definitely going to get over the threshold, right? If that's something you choose to do, and then depending on the criteria, we'd have to evaluate.
And would external recipients of RAP tax also have to pass the short test? Do you know?
Good question. I think they would have to meet the criteria of the RAP tax funding, certainly.
That's what they would have to do. And it's limited to, you could have mentioned, can't necessarily pay, it's programs, capital, those kinds of things.
Not general operating.
Yeah, but that's true too for our community contributions. We can't pay salaries.
Yeah. Could the RAP tax be on a sliding criteria year after year, budget season after budget season? You go, hey, this year we're going to do 50-50, this year we're going to do 80-20.
Yep. Okay. So then we move on to capital projects. And again, we're going to dive into this more in a couple weeks, but I think it's important to include just what was included in our capital projects fund. That was dispersed parking, dark skies, some Mill Creek design work, and the pedestrian footbridge, all of which, except the portion of the dark skies and the Mill Creek design, were rollover from previous years or from the current fiscal year. We also have the water and sewer projects, these enterprise fund projects that are the ongoing bond projects and a couple service line replacements. We also have the sewer projects, which based on the sewer rate study that was recently done, we're proposing the new bond projects listed there, as well as the new shop building.
Where is Desert Rose?
It's the apartments.
Is it 200 North?
Yeah, it's about 2 blocks up from Wendy's.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now we need to have a discussion about ARPA non-entitlement unit money, and this is something that I would need some informal direction on for a reason that we'll get to here. So we've talked about how to spend the $630,000 a few times kind of throughout the last year. And the first reporting is due on April 30th. So as you guys know, there's a standard allowance that allows us the most flexibility of funds. Basically, we can say it's a standard allowance for revenue reduction. That's the criteria that's being used, but we don't have to prove the revenue reduction. So basically, it unencumbers that money, $630,000. And so that's kind of a no-brainer just because it's the easiest to administer. There's no ongoing reporting required. But I found out recently that there's kind of one hook to that. The state recently, as part of the local match program, if you guys remember, we received the grant money for Walnut Lane Phase 1. That was a $50 million program. And in the most recent budget cycle, the state approved an additional $25 million as additional local match dollars. And there's two criteria that would, eligibility, and that would make you ineligible for that program. So the first is that you have unprogrammed ARPA dollars. The second thing that would make you ineligible for that money is that you took the standard allowance for revenue reduction. So I think it's important to note that in order to take the revenue reduction standard allowance, that has to be done before April 30th. It has to be done in the first reporting cycle. You cannot use it in following reporting cycles. And so basically what we have to do is decide as a city, the other criteria that's important to remember is that unprogrammed ARPA dollars, which because of the Walnut Lane award, my interpretation is that we would not be eligible for any of that money because of those unprogrammed dollars. However, that's an interpretation only. They could make the decision that we were eligible despite that caveat. Okay, so the city council, I'm looking for guidance on if we want to go ahead and use that standard allowance or if we want to commit that money to either a housing project, a water project, a broadband project, or a sewer project. So essentially that's what we would have to do with the $630,000 if we wanted to be eligible for the $25 million program. Does that make sense?
So,
go ahead.
So is there a match for that? Is the city required to provide 50/50?
50/50, yep.
Okay, so if we say did the transitional housing, the city would kick in another 630, up to 631, and to have 1.2 million available. Is that up to 1.2 million available? Is that correct?
On the transitional housing option, I would have to verify that that would be allowable under the Treasury guidance for the ARPA funding, which I have not done yet.
Okay, but if it were just some generic eligible project, that's what the finances would look like.
Yes.
And is that up to 631 in the administrative budget now? Or is it in this fiscal year as opposed to next fiscal year?
The usage of that 631?
Yes.
It's simply restricted at this point. So it's contributed to our fund balance and a restricted fund.
Okay.
So we haven't proposed any usage of that fund, of those funds.
Just so I don't misunderstand. So just because one takes the actions that keeps them qualified potentially for part of the 50 million or the 25 billion, this is all allocated by the state, right? So there's no guarantee one will. So we're gambling a little bit.
And we don't really know how well, the other application that we submitted was for the Outfall project. And we never really heard how that ranked in projects. So, if we had that information, it could be beneficial to know that it was a very high-ranking project and we may want to not take that standard allowance so that we could pursue the Outfall project as part of that additional funding mechanism. It seems to me to be a bit of a stretch to be eligible for any of that $25 million, just because we have the unprogrammed money, but it's not a decision that I felt comfortable with making administratively.
I would just say personally, not knowing. I mean, obviously, it's, sometimes nice to roll the dice, but kind of more comfortable with money in the hand than the unknown.
So it's something that we don't need to make a decision tonight. We may send out further information and requests about it as we approach that April 30th deadline. So I know this is it's a lot to just drop on and expect a response. So
yeah, I'm wondering if you could format as like two options.
Okay.
With just and maybe just with the different factors spelled out, and so we can more see the pros and cons.
Yeah, and that is a good point, that there is a public process component as well, and ULCT has clarified that public process is covered with a resolution. And so what we could do is, in the next meeting, we could propose a resolution that would outline two options for that allocation.
While you're preparing options for us and information, can you just let us know what, if any, shovel-ready projects we have that could be significant for? If any, I know some of them are, really, really pricey, but.
Yep, that's a great proposal, great idea. So then kind of maybe moving a step beyond that question, there's this consideration of what to do with, assuming that we use this standard allowance and we have that money is unrestricted. It was made clear in the strategic planning process that money should go towards community betterment. It should go toward the community. We've considered a few options, procuring existing housing for transitional, employee housing. There's a couple opportunities that have been presented there, or some other public benefit. And again, we currently have that money on our balance sheet as restricted funds. No decision has to be made even in this budget cycle. It's just something that we should start to be aware of, and if an opportunity presents itself, be ready to act on. I included a slide here for safety. We have some, like I said, we've filled that position, the safety coordinator position, and they are now essentially an advocate for the safety of essentially the whole organization, but most critically in these, public works, utility departments, and they have proposed I just wanted to call this out specifically because it's so important, is this trench shoring equipment to be used by various departments. And that position will be developing a safety work plan in the next year. So I'll kind of I think I told the mayor 15 minutes.
You did, I was just thinking that.
Yeah. We could have been out of here so much earlier. So I did think it was important to call out these plans and studies that are going to be done. And just as a very high level, the reason that we do so many studies as an organization is because we're managing hundreds of millions of dollars of assets. And as staff, we're so focused on the day-to-day operations, it's important to take a step back and have a plan for some of this long-term replacement. I've already mentioned the financial plan. We've already had that quoted, very reasonable at $23,000. The remaining dollar amounts are all estimates. So a facilities plan, parks master planning, which we've had some questions about. Stormwater fee study is, and I'll get to the importance of the stormwater fee study in a moment. But then we also have some internally developed plans, a sustainability plan, fleet management plan, and that safety work plan.
So I am wondering if it seems like the sustainability plan has, for a couple reasons, is appearing set back. And I'm wondering if either that or maybe a more focused climate action plan being contracted might just move that effort along in a little bit more timely manner. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure about that, and I feel like I probably need to talk internally a bit more, but just want to throw the idea out.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make note of that. Thank you. So I wanted to talk very briefly about the Stormwater Fund. So the UDOT Highway 191 project put that fund into a negative fund balance. This is a situation where state code dictates what you have to do when there's a negative fund balance in a fund. And we meet those requirements fairly easily. You have to contribute 5% of the annual revenue to make up that fund balance. And it's essentially kind of an informal general fund loan. And that, I believe the fund balance off the top of my head is something like, I shouldn't say it because I'll probably get it wrong. It's about $300,000 in the deficit. So what we've proposed to do to remedy that situation, because we don't currently have any stormwater projects in the works, I'm in a future budget amendment, I'm going to be proposing that we eliminate the stormwater overhead allocation for the current fiscal year. That will do a lot to kind of move that needle forward to bring it out of a negative fund balance. It's also important, so as 2 years ago, we completed the water rate study. Last year, we created the sewer rate study, and so to follow that same pattern, this year would be a reasonable year to conduct a stormwater rate study. And this is basically where, I was actually educated by Levi recently about how that stormwater rate was established, and I think it's important that it's very narrow in scope. I think it was to replace one specific piece of equipment on its end of life cycle basis, when we have this massive stormwater system throughout the city where there are needed capital projects. And so we're going to propose a rate study for this next fiscal year. There have also been some emails recently about the Streambank stabilization project adjacent to Woody's Tavern. So we have there is a contract with the adjacent property owner for the essentially replacement of that Streambank stabilization, and that has been included in the fiscal year 23 budget to complete that work, which again is kind of drawing that fund balance in the wrong direction, but it's a contractual obligation. So we are nearing the end here. I wanted to talk about the next steps in the budget process. So Council has now the period between now and early May to make revisions, proposals, suggestions to the budget. I'm happy to do that with meetings with whoever wants to participate, 2-on-2, 1-on-1. Carly and I are happy to accommodate that in any way possible. I'm also can field budget requests via email. That's also reasonable. And then the staff responsibilities to input feedback from council, considering ongoing staff requests. Essentially what we've asked the department heads to do is look forward like 18 months and know there's already been like 4 additional requests made. So there are some ongoing conversations, and we can publicize that so that it's not a surprise to anybody. And then the development of a budget narrative. This is something that's been a priority for me personally, that instead of adopting a final budget that's just a spreadsheet, we're actually telling the story of the city's budget. I think it's ready, the city's ready for that next step in the budget process. And if you guys looked at the capital improvements list that was attached to this meeting, that was maybe a little bit of a insight into the product that we're using to develop that budget narrative. So it should be a good product in the end. Well beyond 15 minutes, I apologize.
No, that's fine, that's great. It's good, it's very informative. Questions, any more questions about our budget? There's going to be more conversation. Ronnie?
Just two, one of which may be a bit premature, but just so we're thinking about it. So we've had some people, as we work on the community visioning and values Tomorrow Together process, ask kind of how and when the outcome of that will be integrated into how we budget. And I was assuming, since the project, we're already getting information, which helps me, but I'm assuming since the project goes through October of this year, that it will certainly be integrated into the following budget process, and that maybe if we learn things as we go along, between now and when we finalize the budget, we can make a case for them. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's right. The strategic action plan that will be developed in the second phase is what will give us those concrete objectives to meet, and we can budget around those. And it's hopefully budgeting through 2030, right? So each year we're revisiting those, maybe updating that plan even in 5 years or so. So we'll be using that tool.
Okay, and I forgot what the other question was, so I'll email you guys when I remember.
Anything else? Caitlin?
In the past, there's been a public-facing dashboard for the community to better understand the budget at a high level and engage with it dynamically. I'm not sure how much that's been utilized, so I'm wondering if you have a sense of that and if you're planning to do something similar this year.
Yeah, we are, and that's part of that budget narrative component.
Okay, great.
Anything else? So Ben, do you want council to coordinate with you? It will be on our next agenda for sure, and the meeting after that. So do you want to just reach out to council and set up some meetings?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that
That would be
work for
great if
everybody?
everybody's open to that.
Yeah, we'll do the 2-on-2s. Those have been really helpful in the past.
Great. Anything else? Thanks, Ben, for that extended 15-minute conversation on our budget.
Just get
It was
really
very
excited.
good. You did a very great job. And of course, we should have known it was going to take longer than that. Next item on our agenda, appointment to the Moab City for our city manager. I wanted to take a few minutes here to just kind of go over the process for the community. I know I've talked to council about this over the last several months. And I recognize right from the beginning that the most important role that I have is appointing the city manager. That's probably one of the most important things that the mayor can do, of course, with the city council's support. And when I first started my first meeting in December after I was elected, I met with Mayor Emily and Ben and Carly. And Carly made it very clear at that time, I'm not interested in the job. And so it was like, oh, bummer, but okay, that kind of gives me a clean slate. It allows me to really open up the door and see what's available and see what's out there. And so I worked with Danny, our HR director, and we had 45 job applicants. Out of those 45 applicants, there was 13 people that were minimally qualified and 3 that were sort of qualified, 1 that was fairly qualified. And so I did my research on all those folks and, that were qualified and looked into their backgrounds and didn't really interview any of them. And in the meantime, I had the opportunity to work with Ben and Carly over a month. And it dawned on me that we've got a great group here. And what happens if Carly decided to leave or Ben decided to leave? That could be a problem for all of us. And so Carly and I worked with the state capitol during the legislative process, and I decided to reach out to her and say, would you be interested in doing this? I mean, has your thought process changed? And I really enjoy working with you and Ben. It seems like a really positive team. And is this something that you would consider? And she said, well, I'm open for the conversation. So we had a few meetings after that, and Carly expressed interest in perhaps doing it, but she really wanted to know that she had support from you all. And so I talked to you all personally about that. I asked you all to do your own personal interviews and to determine for yourselves if you thought that she was the best candidate for the job. And you all did that. And you all came back with a thumbs up. And so it felt like, why are we looking any further? We've got 2 of the best team members in City Hall right now. And they have also, how often do you get a 3-month job interview on the job interview with somebody? I think they both, and Carly in particular, has stepped up to the plate and has done an excellent job and kind of spread her wings as the acting city manager. And I feel like she's the best person for the job right now, and I'm asking you guys to support me in my recommendation to appoint Carly Castle as our new city manager. Do you have any questions for Carly?
I don't have any questions, but I would just like to echo some of those comments that Joette has made. I know when I got elected into this position, I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into, other than that it was going to be a whirlwind. And I can definitely say that it has been that to a certain degree, but it hasn't been quite as rough as I had anticipated. And I think that for me is largely in due part to kind of the stability that Carly and her efforts have really seemed to have kind of instilled within City Hall. I know before kind of stepping into this role, there was a talk of a lot of chaos and tumult happening within the city, and that hasn't been anything that I've really experienced in my time as a city councilor. There is a sense of wanting to help, a responsiveness that is not commonly found in Moab, where I have sent emails and gotten calls within 5 minutes. That's not something you really find in Moab very frequently, so very appreciated. And then just, a tremendous aptitude that really instills a level of confidence and assuredness in the direction that I found myself heading in as a city councilor. So I'd like to very much thank Carly for all of her hard work and kind of support to me, at least throughout this entire process. And I just wanted to reiterate my full support in having her nominated as the city manager.
Thanks, Luke.
I'd echo those same things. I've probably known Carly, she was probably 19 or something, in full disclosure, I've had the opportunity to work with her one-on-one, and then she's great. Carly, and I think she's done a great job for this community. She's spot on. She's direct in what she asked for, and she's very fair. And I think that, I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't have her in this position. And I think that she's done a great job. And I've had a lot of feedback from people that, that Moab's, it's not Moab airing their dirty laundry like it has been in the past, and things are on a really good track. And I think a lot of that is because of who we have, leading, steering the ship. And Carly and Ben are great. I think they're two amazing people, and Carly has the utmost respect of everybody I've seen that she's worked with. So I would very much support this.
I would echo what's already been said. I've really enjoyed working with you, Carly, and it seems like I'm also aware of the process that's happened over the last few months, and so I have a lot of confidence, having watched your confidence increase, and really appreciate the breadth of experience that I hear behind our conversations, and I really look forward to you fully stepping into this role and being able to fully assume the mantle of leadership, and to the extent that I'm aware that you've been holding back a little bit, I think, and so I look forward to moving forward with some degree of permanence, in as much as that exists within city government.
And I would like to echo everything that's been said, but I will say Luke and Jason are lucky. They did not experience the tumult and the chaos. And you weathered that with grace and with compassion. And you took this responsibility, probably not really wanting it. And it's been a pleasure to watch you grow. And all of our staff, Ben, all of our department heads, as we were at strategic planning, I was just struck by all of their professionalism and their candor. And I don't think that is, I think that is a reflection of your leadership. So I fully support and appreciate this administration.
I don't really have much to say other than I enjoyed our one-on-one chats, and thank you for sharing with me some of your vision and ideas, which are cool. And you get extra bonus points if you reinstate the city manager dog in office.
I have already done that.
All right, Kaylin.
I move to confirm the appointment of Carly Castle as the city manager and authorize the mayor to execute an employment agreement between the city of Moab and Carly Castle.
I second that.
Second. Oh.
All right, motion made by Kaylin, seconded by Tawny and Jason. Any further discussion, Kaylin?
Don't forget to vote,
Oh,
because this is the one time, other than a tie, that,
I get to vote?
yeah.
I do? Oh.
It's your first vote.
So what do I have, what do I do?
You're still the chair.
All right,
You can do a roll call, or you can just.
I'll just do an aye, but do you have any further discussion, Kaylin?
No.
Tawny?
No.
Jason?
No.
Ronnie? Luke? Joette. I'm really looking forward to the next 4 years with you guys. It's going to be great. Don't go anywhere. So, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Congratulations. I am going to let you know that Carly was very nervous all day today, so I'm sure she's relieved that this is over.
I don't like being the center of attention. That was very nice, but also very uncomfortable for me.
All righty, great. We've got a new city manager online. That's great. Okay, and report, we also have a new police chief.
We do. I have actually a few reports, and I'm going to start off with the new police chief announcement that we have announced, but just in case anyone's watching and didn't read the newspaper. Jared Garcia, Captain Jared Garcia, who is with the Department of Public Safety right now, he's going to be starting May 9th. He has like a huge amount of experience, both administratively and in investigations. He's a terrific candidate. He is fully aware of the situation here in Moab with our police department and is very eager to help us out. And we're really excited to have him. He instilled a lot of confidence throughout a pretty rigorous interview process. We reached out to a lot of people in the industry to kind of ask about him, and just I think we're really lucky to have him, and I'm excited for him to be here. I want to give an update on our AEH ordinance discussions. So we are going to be having conversations, the mayor, me, Nathan, Robert Keller, and Corey with that Property Rights Coalition group initially, Mike Ostemiller in particular, and I believe Randy Day will be attending and some other folks around town. We're having that conversation tomorrow at 2, and we'll provide an update as soon as we have it, and then we can chart a path forward depending on what that looks like. So just didn't want you to, everyone knows that we're still working on that. There's the ULCT mid-year conference. I dropped the ball on reminding everyone about it because after the legislative session, I just forgot about ULCT completely. It is next week. We can book rooms and we can register for anyone who wants to participate. I will be attending. Ben's thinking about it. And just let us know, and Stephanie Brand is happy to arrange accommodations. It's a good time, and especially for like new folks, if you're available and interested, it's a great networking opportunity too. We have an announcement of someone coming on board, but there's also an announcement of someone leaving the city. So Mila, our sustainability director, is moving on to bigger and better things. She got a job offer, and so she will be departing. Today was her last day. And so we are going to be looking for a new sustainability director. I know that there's some interest from some people here in the community. We have the position open already. So if you guys know anyone who might be a good fit for it, please let me know and put them in just the HR direction. We'd be really interested in talking to them. Ronnie asked me to bring this up, and I'm glad she reminded me. Some water providers here in town, like Gwissa and San Juan County, are going in to purchase a water gauge on Pat Creek. And this will help with like flood alerts and that kind of information. Originally, we had committed to funding a gauge on Mill Creek. And that was a few years ago, according to Chuck, like in the David Everett days. And we committed to pay for the capital as well as the ongoing maintenance. So it's like, I think like they're around like $10,000, $11,000 of capital and then like $3,000 of annual maintenance. For whatever reason, that didn't happen. I don't know what happened with that arrangement. I think the Division of Water Rights was maybe coordinating it. Maybe they found another funder. So all that being said, we're going to be offering to offer some sort of payment for this additional gauge so we can be a partner in this important water monitoring effort. And finally, this is sort of a longer discussion. A few weeks ago when we were at strategic planning, we talked about potentially a demo for the dispersed parking project for some public engagement. And I think like the street lighting that we did, it gave people real world kind of example of what might be happening in the community. And dispersed parking is such a huge investment. It's going to be a very long process. And so I really appreciated the concept. So what we did is we engaged with a contractor to come up with a quote for the demo, and we got that just this week. The quote's about $20,000, and you might ask yourselves why it's so expensive. Our proposal is to basically do a restripe of First East between First North and Center Street. So it's like by Frontier and the county offices. And it's not exactly right? It won't have the amenities. It's not going to look like every single street because each street will be unique. But we have that availability. I think we have budget for it that we can make available. And what we have in mind is doing some public engagement, letting people know what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks, have them come in, sort of sandblast it and stripe it at the end of April, beginning of May. And then we'll be starting the workshops and stakeholder engagement with a lot of the property owners for the permanent dispersed parking project. And we can invite them to take a look and have that available for them, and then for the larger public too. So I mention it only because it's a significant investment. It will also be kind of permanent because we're striping it. We can remove it, of course, but that costs money as well. That's another $20,000. It'll wear away within a few years naturally. So I wanted to know if anyone had any heartburn with us moving forward with that demo. We can also maybe have time to do some public engagement and come back on April 26th and sort of give the final okay. Because I know it's sort of I can sign for it already, but you're going to be changing the parking there permanently for the foreseeable future. Right. Yeah.
I guess I just have a question. On the one hand, I totally understand picking that block. On the other hand, obviously, when I think of intensity of use, I think about, 100 north between Main and 100 east, or, 100 south between Main and 100 east. And obviously, that would probably cost more because there'd be more striping. But I just didn't know if different blocks are options, or this is probably the best one to.
So those other ones are slated for, I think, the permanent for dispersed parking. That is where the improvements will be developed, and so we kind of have it off to the side. I mean, the benefit is we're getting new parking too, right? Like it will be used, and I think you spoke with some folks at the county about their parking needs, or did I imagine that?
No, we referred to, there was a parking plan or study that was done a number of years ago, and that is within the kind of high demand area for parking. And so essentially it's kind of a two birds with one stone. Just if you don't mind, as a financial point of reference, the dispersed parking cost is something like $35,000 per new additional spot. This comes out to about $700 per new additional spot. So it's really a good value also.
Yeah. It just will change the character of that, and you might get some residents with questions, and we didn't want to make such an impactful decision without running it by you all.
Well, I think that's the point, is to generate questions.
Yeah.
And I'm not shocked by the price. I mean, it's physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
It costs more than things that we commonly buy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And then my other question was just that I appreciate the background on that, and that the county was contacted as one of the.
Oh, and I may have been wrong about that. They have not. They will be contacted as part of our engagement. I misunderstood what Ben said.
Okay.
So he identified it from the study as like a high intensity area, but for sure, like the county, Frontier, and then there's some homeowners too that will be contacted to let them know in the next couple of weeks.
If we can just let regional emergency services know, Highway Patrol has offices there.
That's right.
But
They
also sheriff and police, fire and EMS, because they've just recently, been saying either road closures or things going on the roads. It's just very helpful for them to have a heads up if something's going on.
Yeah, not a problem.
And one of the, in discussing plantings, the idea of planters with built-in watering was mentioned as an option. Is this included in this demo?
It's not, but I don't know why it can't be. I'm going to actually, I have like the drawings for it. So I don't think it will, come on. It will preclude us placing those things, because there's these sketched off areas. So that's certainly possible. One sec. The amount that I quoted is for simply the striping, so it would be in addition to that, again, within my signing threshold, so not a problem for us to acquire some things. Because I know, Kaylin, you were looking to get as much of the feel as we could for the demo, not just the parking impact. Let's see.
But I think the parking is the main thing.
It is. I mean, that is the bigger kind of impact for sure. So you can see here, we do have these areas, and maybe not these median strips. We'll have little temporary bollards put into place too. And those are going to be the plastic flap down ones so that you don't get too damaged. But, here in here. It might, I want Chuck's perspective because there are safety issues with like putting things, so I don't want to overpromise, but we definitely can look into that. That's not a problem. Yeah, so this is what we're looking at.
Great, thanks so much for pursuing that.
Yeah. All right, and that is all for my administrative reports.
Okay, thank you, Carly. All right, council. Tawny?
I can't remember. I feel like I was meeting to death. I attended the luncheon for USU, and it was very, very nice. I intended to go to the ribbon cutting, but I went home to get a jacket, and my sweet new little puppy decided that a pot with potting soil would be much better scattered all over my house than in the pot. So I didn't make it to the ribbon cutting. And I attended the think tank both evenings last week, and that was informative. And I think that's about it.
Thank you. Kaylin?
I attended a Grand County Travel Council meeting, and there was a presentation on just the early results from the timed entry. And the park reports that, for the most part, they're getting good feedback about it. People appreciate it and are going out of their way to thank them for providing this. They do seen a lot of no-shows because the cost of a permit is so low that presumably people that are here for a period of time might just get a permit for every day and see what they want to do. But because they offer a limited number of next day permits, they're compensating for that by just increasing that allocation to better approach full utilization. There is a bit of a 5 p.m. rush at the end of the permit period, but so far that hasn't resulted in a park shutdown. It has taken a little time to clear. But they will continue to adjust as they gather information and see visitor feedback. We reviewed current occupancy and room rates, and it seems like so far they are relatively high, but hotels are reporting that this is one of the slowest Jeep safaris they've seen in the memory. Apparently that's not the case for short-term rentals. Those are still popular. It seems like the Grand County Economic Development and as well as hoteliers have access to detailed information, and so if you wanted to then dig into it with them to try to do more informed crystal ball gazing about revenue projections and like how this information might translate into actual sales tax revenue changes, could be interesting. And then I also attended the Grand County Planning Commission General Plan Update Public Hearing. I attended as just myself, a member of the public, not as a member of the City Council, but it seems important enough to mention it. I was the only member of the public that attended. They've had much better participation in their other workshops, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, and they are moving forward on it. But there's like our own visioning and probably general plan process. There's a lot in it, and I saw that there has been some city staff engagement in it, especially Mila. So I encourage you all just to pay attention to that as well, since it does relate to our work. And then lastly, I don't normally report on these on webinars. I attend quite a few of them just to educate myself about what other communities are doing. But this one is somewhat germane. Utah Clean Energy is tracking the, every 3 years, the state goes through a building code adoption process. The international building codes are on a 3-year revision cycle, and then the state tracks that. And so the Utah Homeowners Association, Association of Home Builders, typically, and this time around is no different, proposes weakening of the energy efficiency standards. In this case, it's sometimes significantly, like in a regressive manner. And so this is an opportunity for local governments to engage. The building code energy efficiency standards are in a way to incrementally advance energy conservation statewide, but in a way that has big impacts because it affects all new building and remodels. So I'm going to follow up with Barry and other staff to see what, if anything, the city is doing, and perhaps do more, and perhaps maybe in conjunction with other aligned communities.
Thanks, Kaylin. Luke?
Yeah, so I attended the Planning Commission meeting about the Ordinance 2020-05, and just kind of got feedback there from the planning commissioners who are generally in support of the city moving forward with that ordinance. I've been in discussions with some of those planning commissioners since everything kind of got a little turned upside down, and so they're kind of understanding of the council's position in that. I attended the USARA Community Recovery Center ribbon cutting, which was a really exciting thing. Several of our community members worked really long and hard to get that up and running, and they're really excited to be able to create an open and inviting space for a portion of our community that for a long time I think was kind of made to feel as though they needed to hide in the shadows. So really excited about that. Also attended the USU ribbon cutting. Really thrilled about the plans for that entire development and just how thought through everything in that building is. There's just like everything has like 4 or 5 different purposes in there. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really efficient use of space. As I had mentioned earlier, I met with Seacaven just to kind of get a better sense of how things are going with them. Obviously, housing is kind of their #1 issue right now, and it's exacerbating kind of the depletion of some of their emergency needs funds. But they did want to highlight Colleen McGee and Nathaniel Clark. They really appreciate Colleen McGee's kind of focus on special victims, and Nathaniel Clark is the new victims advocate, and they have really positive feedback about Nathaniel that they wanted to share. And then, yeah, participated in the think tank over the last week for the 2-day period, and I found that to be an extremely enlightening experience. I was really, really impressed by the turnout and the engagement from the community members who did turn out. Definitely left me feeling a lot more positive and optimistic, and really kind of revitalized my sense of community while I was there, and kind of reminded me that when there are these big issues kind of throughout Moab's history, Moab does come together to try to work things out and comes to some sort of shared solution. So I'm really excited to see that process continue. Anybody who wants to continue to engage in that, there's going to be more opportunities down the road. I also wanted to highlight that on May 5th at 5 p.m., the hospital is going to be hosting a Facebook Live event to discuss the expanded addictions treatment and recovery options in our community. So they will be opening a addictions clinic that provides a myriad of services, including methadone, so like medication-assisted treatments. I know that there are some people in the community that might have some concerns about that type of treatment approach, and this is an opportunity to potentially get a little educated and get a better sense of what that all entails. And then, yeah, I attended the Trail Mix meeting today where, sorry, I gotta go through my notes. Looks like the trail ambassadors have started kind of making their presence felt at different locations around the area and have gotten really good engagement from all of the visitors and some really positive feedback. So Anna Sprout just got installed to oversee the Trail Ambassador program. There's a total of 6 positions out there and only 3 of them have been filled. So they're still looking for 3 more individuals. They're specifically looking for bike trail ambassadors. So if anybody wants to get paid to hang out at bike trails and ride around and kind of help educate some of our tourists about sustainable practices to help preserve our area, that's definitely a great option out there. They are also looking at implementing a junior ranger program to start that education process really early on. And that sounds really exciting. And then kind of on a slightly more somber note, we got word that the Forest Service currently only has 1 crew member for this year for mitigating kind of some of the fire stuff, and that's largely in response to them not being able to find housing for other members of the crew. So yeah, just kind of a reiteration that this housing crisis is really affecting our entire area's ability to be able to proactively protect itself and on top of meeting its day-to-day needs with kind of the strain that has been put on our essential services. Oh man, sorry, I didn't want to end on that kind of somber of a note, but I think that's all I have in terms of updates for me.
Thanks, Luke. Ronnie?
Let's see. On March 28th, I had the pleasure of attending an interview with our now new police chief, along with Luke and the director of Seahaven. So they all asked good questions. And on, let's see, got other meetings here that you guys have referenced. I won't refer to those. On the 1st of April, I did attend the USU ribbon cutting, and that was all quite interesting, and had some opportunity to have some conversations with our representatives as well. Earlier at the lunch, Representative John Curtis was there, and then Carl Albrecht and Senator Hinkins were there as well. Let's see, on April 1st, we also had a GWISA, a Grand Water Sewer Service Agency, meeting with Mark Stilson, who most of you know is regional engineer with the Division of Water Rights here in the state. And he talked to us about the new gauge at Pat Creek. And for anybody who hasn't had a chance to follow that, Carly was talking about our participating in part in that, and they were asking GWISA to pay the one-time share the one-time equipment cost in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy. So just if anyone's interested in that gauge, we had a temporary gauge up by Pat Creek by the bridge last year because of the fire, and that was just temporary. So now they're seeing the value in having a permanent one there, both for early flood warning for the community, everyone downstream, but also because there is a sense that the water coming down off the mountain in Pat Creek drainage is believed to be a significant source of recharge for the valley fill aquifer in Spanish Valley. And so this will help quantify and monitor base flow conditions coming out of there, and also understand the impacts of climate change and as all this changes. Let's see. So on that day, we just got more information from Mark Stilson. I was also asked to record a statement for the next round of regional HAZE meetings about the health and visibility benefits of reducing emissions at Hunter and Huntington coal plants. So I did a little video for that. Let's see, on the 5th of April, Carly was nice enough to come with me to follow up on some concerns that we've been getting from community members and some of you about these basic questions we get from the community about when there's an emergency in town or when my water or sewer stops flowing, how am I supposed to know about it? And I think we've all had our individual experiences with this. I think in the past week or two, I came off the mountain, I saw the big plume of smoke that ended up being, the shed over at the charter school. but I didn't know what was on fire, and I couldn't really find anything about it. I happened to go by it, so that gave me more of a sense. But there is kind of a sense in the community of, shouldn't we have a centralized place or something where we can more easily find out what's going on instead of having to check a lot of Facebook sites, or, we have some residents who don't want to get on Facebook, or other things. So we did go to a monthly meeting, and actually I don't know that they gave us I don't know that it has an official name, but it's a monthly meeting of users of dispatch and people in emergency response who are trying to improve communications, and they discuss things like radio systems. So it's folks like the sheriff's office, the police department, search and rescue, BLM, Park Service. And so we went to kind of ask them, okay, well, what's the best practice and what should we know and how can we help with this? So we did have some discussion about how we do in the community have this reverse 911 system called AlertSense. And historically, there were some efforts to do more notifications, and I think as a combination of COVID and probably some staffing, there's been less of that. So the desire to use that more and to educate people more about how they can use it. So they're in the process of setting up a new round of meetings for representatives from EMS, fire, the city. I know Carly made some recommendations about public works individuals, and I think there's probably be a police member of the police who attends. San Juan County and GWISA, because they have water and sewer, and on the city end with the public works end. It was also suggested that someone from the school district attend, and county roads. So it's just an interesting discussion because people brought up different challenges that they've had and sometimes knowing about things. For some of the emergency response workers, it's sometimes things like a road closure. They don't necessarily know it's happening. They go to respond, and all of a sudden they realize they can't take the route they were thinking they could take. So I think it'll be good for all of us, and we'll get together. I did ask that a city council member and a county council member could at least attend that first meeting, at least so they understand what kind of things it's helpful for elected officials to be informed about, at least from that AlertSense system. So I was thinking it would help me if each of you just shoot me an email and let me know, like, what kind of stuff would it help you to receive a text about that might be extra in addition to what the general public might get. I mean, if there's anything like that. I think a lot of us think, fire, gas leak, our own public works issues. So anyway, just let me know what's on your list. We did get an interesting report or two from folks at NPS. Kaylin already talked about that, but I know they had some good things to say about timed entry and good feedback they were getting from residents about having a more positive park experience that was less crowded, and some of them could actually find parking, so that's exciting. I won't say much more about the think tank other than I don't know about you guys, but I got wholly positive feedback from people who came, and for people who weren't there, there were probably about 60, 70 people there, just happy about the selection of the consultants and the approach they were taking, and just that they felt that they were being listened to. So I think we'll all look forward to that continuing. People have also been helpful at saying, oh, well, we noticed so-and-so wasn't here, and it was a big time commitment, and not everybody can make that, but double thanks to everybody who did show up and was frank about their feelings about everything. And I know I've been making a short list, and you probably all have, to send to the consultants about just people that people didn't see represented there, because I know that's part of their next step, is to reach out to other groups like youth or whoever. We did, during the April 7th workshop at the Grand Center, I did have to step out for about half an hour because we did have a phone conversation for GWISA where we once again discussed the Pack Creek gauge. So exciting how many times you can discuss something like this. But so they have decided, they did vote to have Manager Dana Van Horn go ahead and put together a memorandum of understanding with different users to pursue getting that gauge. They had several questions, so thanks to Carly and Chuck, because they've answered some questions from the city end I couldn't answer at the time. And then just as a last thing, I bet some of you as well, I'm continuing to get follow-up questions from some of the residents on Arches. So I know when we met in, I think it was March 22nd, we talked about in May, having another meeting with staff and the attorney, to talk about all of these issues from bunkhouses and dorms and occupancy and household definitions. And so I didn't know if there were any updates on that. Otherwise, I'm telling people to watch for a meeting in May. I don't know if there's anything. And I think that was it for me.
Thanks, Ronnie. Jason?
All right, so I attended last meeting, I attended 3 ribbon cuttings. One for Poppy and Pine, a kitchen knick-knack store. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. USU, and then USAR Recovery Center. Attended all those recoveries. They're all really good, all in one day. It was a good day. I attended the Sustainable Trails Committee meeting, which it sounded like we talked a lot of the same things that you guys talked about at yours, that they're doing a lot of really good things. I rode my bike up the other day to Powerhouse. They were there on Saturday, and so it's good to see them. They're having a lot of interaction with people, and I think it's going to make a big difference. I attended the airport board meeting last week, and as far as big changes are, they are currently, they don't have a director of the airport, and so I think that there is a process that they're going to be filing that and or kind of splitting that into maybe some different job duties, stuff that may have 2 instead of 1.
They have an acting one, an acting director?
Acting one is Tammy Helen, and she's she's done it before they hired Andy, and she's doing a great job. She's super organized and is excellent and stuff. So then, and then the airport's working on building a new building to store all of their they got some grants for some snow removal equipment and from the FAA, and part of that the FAA wants them indoors and stuff, so they'll be stored in there, which is good. And that is about it. That's all I have.
All right, thanks, Jason. Everybody's pretty busy. I met with the Division of Water Right representatives. Carly and I met with Mark Stilson and State Engineer Teresa Williamson to talk about the water rights issues that are happening in Moab. Met with Representative John Curtis, was here at the City Hall meeting with the caucus, I believe, and stopped in my office and we had a good little brief discussion. He's going to be back in town. I'll let you guys know. It'd be great for you all to get to meet him the next time he's in town. I've also was meeting with Joel Brown, who's Senator Mike Lee's local Utah legislative assistant, to talk about the Housing Act that he just introduced in the Senate that's co-sponsored by Senator Romney and Senator Barroso. And this is the Helping Open Unutilized Space to Ensure Shelter Houses Act, which I'm following it closely. It could be an opportunity. I'm not quite sure yet, but I just want to pay attention to that because there are some issues that could be concerning, but at the same time, I think we need to be paying attention. During those conversations, I suggested to Joel that he reach out to our state representatives because part of this legislation requires affordable housing, and if that's going to be the case, it needs to be very defined. And that if this is something that is allowed, I think it's important that our community isn't able to do what we can to allow for affordable housing. So I thought it might be good for him to reach out to our legislators to let us know, to give us some authority to do what we can to improve our housing situation here. Let's see. Went to the USU ribbon cutting. I meet with Jen Sadoff on a monthly basis to talk about healthcare and hospital issues. So I'll be meeting with her next week. And I was interviewed with Luke with KSL and KUTV to talk about the housing issues. The KUTV one that you and I were in, I think is going to be more on what we're doing already and some of the programs that are already in place. So it was just good to get out there so that people can hear what our issues are down here. And then I did get to go into Arches in timed entry. I got a reservation, and it was awesome to go into that park, to find parking, to hike on the trails, to feel like you were there by yourself. It reminded me of what it was like 30 years ago. It was great, and I know they've got some tweaks to make. I encourage you to try to get a timed entry reservation and experience for yourself, because it was a very good experience for us. We got to go to Delicate Arch, we got to hike the windows, we got to do Devil's Garden, all in an afternoon. So that was pretty exciting. So that's a really good thing that the park is doing, and I hope they can make it permanent. And that's all I have. So, with that, anything else? Meeting adjourned.